The waiting fire. The Arizona Territory in
You all right,
1878
little
was a
one?
place that thinned people down to their
What
bones.
happened here?
Dry air scraped the throat. Wind carried dust through every crack and crevice of the land. Gunshots echoed through the canyon. Mason Calloway, former Civil War sharpshooter, clutched his Winchester rifle as he leaped from the rocky ledge into the shallow stream below. Blood from the bullet wound in his shoulder left crimson trails on stone as he disappeared into the darkness. The baying of tracking hounds and shouts of bounty hunters grew distant behind him. Only a few hours remained until dawn, the survival window for a hunted man with $1,000 price on his head. Miles away, in a narrow gorge hidden from the world, a small fire flickered. A young Apache woman crouched beside it, hunting knife in hand, eyes scanning the shadows. Sierra was 18 now, the lone survivor of her tribe slaughtered by the army 4 years ago. The fire wasn't just for warmth, it was a signal, a beacon for anyone who might still be searching for her. Sierra moved like a shadow through the canyon at dawn, checking her rabbit snares. Her movements were quick, efficient, born from years of solitary survival. She gathered prickly pear pads with practiced hands, careful to avoid the spines. Every sound made her freeze, head tilted toward the source. When the distant rumble of horses reached her ears, she melted into the rocks. An army patrol passed half a mile away, 6 men scanning the terrain with field glasses that glinted in the morning light. Sierra pressed herself against stone, barely breathing, using the skills her father had taught her. She pulled a blanket of desert colors over herself, becoming just another part of the landscape. Only when the patrol disappeared did she move again, hands trembling slightly. The soldiers had come closer this time. Each month they ventured further into the canyonlands, burning any native camps they found. That night, as Sierra sat by her small fire, memories washed over her. The screams, the gunfire. She had been 14, gathering berries when the soldiers attacked her tribe's temporary camp. The ambush had been well planned, cutting off escape routes, driving her people into a killing zone. In the chaos, she had hidden in a narrow crevice, watching as families scattered. Her father had shouted for everyone to run, to meet at the sacred caves. Sierra had waited at those caves for days. No one came. 20 miles north, Mason Calloway slipped into the mining town of Copper Springs just after dusk. His eyes constantly scanned for threats as he made his way to a dilapidated shack at the edge of town. 3 men waited inside, crates of rifles stacked against the wall. "These the Spencer repeaters?" Mason asked, examining one of the weapons with expert hands, checking the action and barrel with practiced efficiency. The leader, a bearded man named Holt, nodded. "Straight from the Army surplus, 50 rifles just like you wanted." Mason worked the lever on one rifle, the metallic click echoing in the small space. 30, the deal was 30. Price went up. Holt smirked, thumbs hooked in his belt near a silver-plated revolver. Too many questions being asked about missing shipments. Mason's hand moved closer to his holstered Colt. "We had an agreement." "Things change, Calloway." Holt's eyes narrowed, especially when word comes that Kansas law is offering good money for information on your whereabouts. The negotiation ended with 30 rifles and a warning. Holt had other buyers if Mason couldn't deliver the money. As Mason loaded the weapons into his pack horse's saddlebags, movement caught his eye. Men positioning themselves between buildings, hands hovering near holstered pistols. The ambush came as he reached the edge of town. 3 hired guns stepped from the shadows, Remington revolvers drawn. Mason dropped to one knee, his Colt appearing in his hand as if by magic. 2 shots rang out in rapid succession. One man fell clutching his chest. Mason felt the burn of a bullet tearing through his shoulder
Are you
as he
all right,
mounted
little
his
one?
horse and spurred it forward. More
What
shots
happened here?
echoing behind him. Blood soaked his shirt as he rode hard into the night. The wound wasn't deep, but it burned like fire with every hoofbeat. Mason Calloway was a man with too many enemies. Former sharpshooter for the Union Army, now a bounty hunter and gun runner with a reputation for deadly accuracy. He'd killed a corrupt sheriff in Kansas 6 months ago. A justified shooting according to some, murder according to the law. The price on his head kept growing. By midday, Mason's strength was fading. The wound had stopped bleeding, but throbbed with warning heat. He needed shelter, somewhere to tend it before infection set in. It was then that he spotted the thin wisp of smoke rising from a narrow gorge, so faint most would miss it. Mason pulled his Winchester from its scabbard and approached cautiously. He slid from his horse at the ridge, moved silently down the rocky slope. Years of tracking had taught him to place each foot carefully, avoiding loose stones. The smoke led to a crude shelter built against the canyon wall. Mason raised his rifle, scanning for occupants. That's when he saw her, a young Apache woman, knife in hand, frozen in mid-movement. Their eyes locked. For a long moment, neither moved. Mason had his rifle aimed, finger near the trigger. The woman held her knife ready, muscles tense to throw or lunge. Something in her eyes gave him pause. Not just fear, but dignity, defiance. Mason slowly lowered his rifle. He reached into his saddlebag, removed jerky, a small packet of coffee and a roll of bandages, and placed them on a flat rock. Without a word, he backed away, mounted his horse, and rode to a small clearing half a mile distant. From her hiding place, Sierra watched in confusion. Why had the white man not attacked? Why leave food? It must be a trap. Yet hunger gnawed at her stomach as she stared at the offerings. For 3 days, the silent exchange continued. Mason would leave something on the rock: ammunition, wire for snares, coffee. Each morning he'd find something in return: a rabbit skin, herbs that reduced fever, a water gourd. Neither spoke. Neither approached the other directly. On the 3rd day, Mason discovered a deep cut in his horse's reins. Clean, deliberate. Someone was watching them. When he looked up toward the ridge, sunlight reflected off field glasses. A second later, the first bullet tore through the air beside his head. Mason dropped behind a boulder, Winchester already in hand. 3 men on the ridge. Not army, not ranchers. Bounty hunters. He recognized the lead figure immediately. Rawlins, a hired gun from Kansas with a personal vendetta against Mason. They must have tracked him from Copper Springs. Mason didn't wait for them to pin him down. He circled behind them, using the rocky terrain for cover. When the first man separated from the others to relieve himself, Mason struck. One swift blow with his rifle butt, and the man collapsed. Mason took his revolver and ammunition before moving on. The gunfight with the remaining 2 was brief but fierce. Bullets ricocheted off rock as Mason fired from cover, dropping one man with a shot through the chest. Rawlins escaped, spurring his horse down the trail. "This isn't over, Calloway," his voice echoed through the canyon. "I'll be back with more men." Sierra had witnessed the entire encounter from a hidden perch. That evening, she ventured closer to Mason's camp than ever before, watching as he cleaned his weapons. He demonstrated how to repair a broken knife handle, speaking aloud, though he knew she couldn't understand most of his words. She showed him where to find water in the dry washes, how to identify plants that held moisture when the creek ran low. "Prickly pear," she said suddenly, pointing to a cactus. "Water inside." Mason nearly dropped his knife in surprise. It was the first time she had spoken. 2 days later, dust on the horizon signaled trouble. A band of 6 riders approached the canyon. Rawlins and his men, looking for shelter and revenge. Mason warned Sierra with gestures, pointing to the riders and making a cutting motion across his throat. "Hide," he said simply, knowing she understood this word. Mason spent the afternoon setting traps around the perimeter of the canyon. Tripwires, pitfalls covered with brush, strategically placed rifles that could be fired remotely with cord. Skills learned during the war, now employed to protect this small patch of earth. That night, a violent storm descended on the canyon. Lightning split the sky as rain pounded the earth. Mason's small lean-to offered little protection. Water coursed down the canyon walls, threatening to flood the lower ground. Sierra appeared from the darkness, gesturing for him to follow. She led him to her shelter, a small cabin built into the canyon wall, reinforced with stone and timber salvaged from abandoned wagons. Inside, it was dry and surprisingly warm. They sat across from each other, the small fire between them casting dancing shadows on the walls. For the first time, Sierra spoke her name. "Sierra," she said, pointing to herself, voice rough from disuse. Mason nodded, repeating the name carefully. "Mason," he responded, tapping his chest. Sierra studied him in the firelight, then moved to examine his shoulder. The wound from the gunfight had worsened, angry red streaks spreading from the entry point. Infection. Without a word, she gathered herbs from a small pouch, chewed them into a paste, and applied it to the wound. The relief was almost immediate. As fever took hold that night, Mason drifted in and out of consciousness. In his delirium, he spoke of Kansas, of the sheriff who'd been selling young women to the mines, of the gunfight that had forced him to flee. He spoke of the men he'd killed during the war, faces that haunted him still. Sierra listened to it all, understanding more English than Mason realized. "Ban vow tum," Mason instructed as Sierra aimed the Colt. "Don't rush." Sierra didn't answer. She slowly inhaled, held her breath, and squeezed the trigger. The bottle 50 yards away shattered. Without hesitation, she pivoted and fired at another target Mason hadn't even seen, a rabbit darting through the brush. The animal dropped instantly. "Father teach," she said simply, making Mason raise his eyebrows in surprise. "You're a natural," he replied, genuinely impressed. "Better than most men I've trained?" Later that day, Mason woke to voices outside the cabin. He reached for his rifle, moving silently to the small window. Rawlins and 4 men had found the canyon. "Stay hidden," he whispered to Sierra. "Whatever happens." Mason stepped outside, rifle held casually, as if he'd been expecting them. "Private property," he called. "State your business." Rawlins sneered. "Came looking for shelter from the storm. Found something much more interesting." His eyes scanned the cabin. "Nice setup for a man on the run." "Just passing through," Mason replied. "Like yourselves." "Funny thing," Rawlins continued, dismounting. "We found Indian sign all around this canyon. Fresh, too." He spat tobacco juice. "Army pays good money for information about hostiles." Mason's grip tightened on his rifle. "Nothing here but me." "We'll just have a look around," Rawlins said, gesturing to his men. "No." Mason raised his rifle slightly. "You won't." The standoff stretched for a long moment before Rawlins laughed. "Always did have more guts than sense, Calloway." He mounted his horse. "We'll be back. Count on it." After they departed, Sierra emerged from her hiding place. For the first time, real trust showed in her eyes. "4 years," Sierra said that evening, in halting English. "I wait. My people never come." Mason nodded, understanding the weight of those words. He'd been running for so long, never staying in one place. Yet here, in this hidden canyon, he felt something he hadn't in years. Purpose. He began reinforcing the cabin, setting posts for a stronger fence line. Sierra watched with curiosity at first, then began helping, her slender hands strong and capable. A week later, trouble arrived in official form. A deputy sheriff and 2 ranch hands rode into the canyon, eyes scanning the improvements Mason had made. "Got reports of squatters," the deputy said, hand resting near his pistol. He studied Mason's face. "You look familiar." Mason kept his expression neutral. Bought this parcel fair. Papers are inside. The deputy dismounted. Let's see 'em. As they entered the cabin, Sierra slipped out the back, disappearing into the brush. The deputy examined the land deed, a forgery Mason had obtained in Copper Springs, with narrowed eyes. Says here you're alone, the deputy noted, but I'm seeing signs of others. Mason met his gaze steadily. My family arrived recently. Family? The deputy's eyebrow raised. My wife, Apache, married her last spring. The lie came easily. You got a problem with that? The deputy's face tightened with disgust. Your business who you bed down with. He handed back the papers. Keep your Indian on a short leash. Army's been having trouble with renegades. Mason's hand itched to draw his pistol, but he kept his voice level. She's family. Remember that if you come back. The tension stretched until the deputy finally nodded and departed with the ranch hands. When Sierra returned, Mason explained what had happened. Why? She asked simply. Only way they leave you alone, he answered. Family's the one thing they won't separate on paper. That night, Sierra sat closer to Mason than ever before, their silence no longer a barrier but a shared language. Mason needed supplies. With Sierra's wound, herbs running low and ammunition dwindling, he had no choice but to risk a trip to town. He left at dawn, promising to return by nightfall. Copper Springs was busy with miners when Mason arrived. He kept his hat pulled low, moving quickly between shops. The general store owner eyed him suspiciously but filled his order. Flour, coffee, ammunition, medical supplies. It was at the livery stable that things went wrong. That's him, a voice shouted. That's Calloway, the Kansas killer. Mason drew his pistol as bullets splintered the wood beside him. He fired twice, diving behind a water trough as more shots rang out. The gunfight was chaotic, Mason moving from cover to cover, firing only when certain of his target. 3 men went down before he made it to his horse. A bullet grazed on his thigh, bleeding freely as he galloped out of town. At the canyon, Sierra waited anxiously. When Mason hadn't returned by dusk, she ventured to higher ground, scanning the trails. The sound of a horse approaching sent her back to the cabin for her pistol, but relief flooded her when she recognized Mason's silhouette, though he slumped in the saddle. While tending his new wound, Sierra told him of her discovery. She had found her tribe's old camp in a side canyon. Skeletal remains, broken weapons, evidence of a massacre. Among the dead, she had found her father's medicine pouch. But more disturbing were the items she discovered. A distinctive silver watch and a custom-tooled gun belt that she recognized from seeing Rawlins and his men. They there, she said grimly. When soldiers attack, they help kill my people. Mason understood immediately. Rawlins wasn't just after him. He'd been part of the civilian militia that sometimes assisted army patrols in pacifying hostile tribes. The realization cemented their alliance in a new way. No more wait, Sierra said firmly. No more signal fire. 3 days later, as dawn broke over the canyon, Mason spotted dust on the horizon. Through his field glass, he counted 8 riders. Rawlins had returned with reinforcements. Mason and Sierra had prepared for this moment, setting traps throughout the approach to the cabin. Remember the plan, Mason said. Let them get close. The first trap, a tripwire connected to a shotgun, took down 2 riders immediately. The others scattered for cover, returning fire. Mason's sharpshooting dropped another from nearly 500 yards. Sierra's knowledge of the terrain proved invaluable as she directed Mason to firing positions that offered perfect angles on their attackers. Ridge left, she whispered. Sun in their eyes. Mason followed her lead, picking off another man with a clean shot through the chest. The battle lasted for hours. Bullets chipped away at the cabin walls. When Rawlins and his 3 remaining men made a final push toward the cabin, Mason took a bullet to the chest. Sierra dragged him to safety behind a stone wall, returning fire with his Winchester. "Get to the caves," Mason gasped, blood soaking his shirt. Sierra shook her head. "No leave." She pressed a bandage to his wound, then grabbed extra ammunition. "I finish." She moved like smoke through the rocks, using trails only she knew. The first of Rawlins' men died without ever seeing her. A knife across the throat, silent and efficient. The second turned just in time to see Sierra before she put a bullet through his eye. Rawlins himself was smarter. He doubled back, surprising Sierra from behind, knocking the rifle from her hands. The fight was brutal. Sierra's knife against Rawlins' brute strength. He slammed her against a boulder, hands closing around her throat. "Should have killed you with the rest of your filthy tribe," he snarled, "after we had our fun with the women." The gunshot echoed through the canyon. Rawlins' eyes widened in surprise as he looked down at the expanding red stain on his chest. Behind him stood Mason, barely upright, smoking pistol in hand. "She ain't alone," Mason said, before collapsing to his knees. A week after the battle, 3 strangers approached the cabin. Sierra spotted them first, quickly grabbing the Winchester. "Stop," she commanded from the porch, her voice strong and clear. "Private land." The men halted, clearly surprised to see an Apache woman speaking clear English and handling a rifle with confidence. "Just looking for water and shelter," the leader said. Sierra kept the rifle steady. "Creek that way. Drink and move on." The men exchanged glances, then slowly backed away toward the creek. Mason, watching from inside, nodded with approval. She had learned well. Spring came to the canyon with unexpected gentleness. The cabin, rebuilt after the battle, stood stronger than before. Mason's wound had been severe. The bullet had punctured his lung, but Sierra's knowledge of traditional medicine had saved his life. As they sat on the porch watching the sunset, Mason finally told Sierra everything. About the war, about the men he'd killed, about the bounty on his head. She listened without judgment, understanding better than most the weight of survival. "This place," Mason said, gesturing to the canyon around them. "It's good land. Could build something here." Sierra nodded. "No more waiting," she agreed. "No more running." They worked through the spring, planting corn and beans in the fertile soil near the creek. Mason taught Sierra about property laws, about how to navigate the changing world beyond the canyon. She taught him the Apache ways of living in harmony with the harsh land. An army patrol passed through once, but instead of hiding, Mason and Sierra stood their ground. The lieutenant checked their papers, nodded respectfully, and moved on. The deed listing them as family had been filed with the territorial office. Official now, not just a cover story. By summer's end, their small ranch had taken shape. A corral held 3 horses, chickens pecked in the yard. Inside the cabin, Sierra had created a home from what once was merely shelter. The signal fire that had burned for 4 years was extinguished for good. On the anniversary of the day they had first met, Mason and Sierra stood on their porch, watching the setting sun paint the canyon walls red and gold. They were no longer fugitives. They were protectors of this small piece of earth they both had come to love. "Never thought I'd stop running," Mason said quietly, "but some things are worth standing your ground for." Sierra's hand found his, a gesture that needed no words. In the distance, a lone rider appeared at the mouth of the canyon, approaching slowly. Mason's hand moved to his holstered pistol out of habit, but he didn't draw. The rider carried no weapons, and on his saddle was tied a medicine bundle of the kind Apache healers carried. Around the rider's neck hung a distinctive eagle feather amulet, the mark of Sierra's father's bloodline. "Your people?" Mason asked quietly. Sierra's breath caught, recognition and disbelief warring in her eyes. "Maybe," she whispered, her voice trembling for the first time since Mason had known her. maybe not all gone. Together they stood, watching as the rider approached, no longer waiting for the pass, but ready to face whatever future came riding toward them. To be continued.